Greetings and salutations, you lively little spirits. You perhaps did not ask for whom the bell tolls, but I assure you it is for thee, because it is ding dong darkness time, and I'm Allison Dixon. Today, I have a specter with me that may sound familiar to many of you, not only because he's been on this show once before, but because he's the co host of the hit true crime podcast, The Prosecutors. So let's point our planchettes in the direction of hello and welcome Brett back to the dark side.
Hello, Allison. That was such an awesome intro. I don't think I can match you like step for step on all those Halloween terms you were throwing in there. This is going to be tough.
I know I had the benefit of doing this when I was more alert this morning, writing that little bit. I don't know where it's going to go from here, but I'm excited because I have gotten a lot of people asking me to do an episode on ghosts. I guess it's a natural topic that gravitates toward the type of stuff that I do. And I just didn't know what to do. And then I asked you, I said, you got any good ghost stuff? Because I know you have a ghost background, which is why you're here. And we decided, hey, I've done some ghost stuff. You're on a darkness podcast. Let's get together on this and talk about ghosts. So here we are. And I should first say also, that people who love your show know that October on The Prosecutors is where you seamlessly blend horror with true crime. But they might not all know that you have a bit of a history as a ghost hunter. And since that's the topic at hand on the show today, but real quick, give me a rundown of when and where you did your paranormal research and how you came to be interested in doing it.
I mean, look, I think like most people, I've always been, maybe not most people, but I've always been really interested in the paranormal, always been interested in ghosts and spirits and lore and legend, like all that stuff. And it was always something that I had an interest in because I also have a real interest in history, and I love old buildings and I love abandoned buildings. You know, the sort of urban explorer thing appeals to me as well. And at the time when I actually ended up joining a paranormal research group, I was just out of law school and I had a job clerking. And for those of you who don't know, if you're a lawyer, you sometimes have the opportunity to work for a judge. So I was working for a district court judge, a federal district court judge for a couple of years. And I was in a place where I didn't know a whole lot of people. So I would go to work and do my job. But then when the day ended, I just kind of went home and I guess I could watch TV, but I didn't know a lot of people. And at some point I decided since I didn't have anything to do, I was going to write a book because I was kind of into writing as well. And I was into horror. And this is a long-winded story of telling you how I ended up joining this group. But in any event, part of the book was going to be set in a mental institution, an abandoned mental institution. Actually, the mental institution was not abandoned at the time that the book was taking place. And I felt like I really need to know what these places look like. And I was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama at the time. And Tuscaloosa, weirdly, is like this weird sort of center of mental health institutions, which for a lot of people who are not fans of the University of Alabama probably does not come as a surprise. But we have at least four different mental institutions. One for the criminally insane. So we have a high security one. We have one that was for adolescents who had mental issues. We had one that was for adults with mental issues who didn't have to be confined. So they would come there, they would work, they would learn, and it's sort of an outpatient thing. And then we had one that's been there since like 1850 that is one of the super historical asylums that was one of the first big asylums in the United States. It's a Kirkbride place, if people know who Kirkbride is. And in any event, there were a lot of them. And so I'm like, I should go see one. And there was one that was abandoned. But because I am afraid of breaking the law, I'm very law abiding, I didn't just want to like go out there and trespass. And so I thought, I bet there are videos of this online. So I go on YouTube and I'm looking for videos of people who've gone into this place so I can see what it's like. And that's when I found this paranormal group in town who was going there regularly to do like ghost investigations. And I thought, if I join this group, I can go and see this firsthand. And so that's actually how I ended up joining the group. Was I joined it. It wasn't that I didn't have an interest in the paranormal already. I absolutely did, but I kind of joined it just so I could go to this one place and see what it looked like.
I love this answer so much because I think to myself, and you and I have talked about this privately, but I'll talk about it here too. Very similar interests. Have talked about one previous experience that Chris and I did when we walked through in an abandoned psychiatric treatment center. It was also a poorhouse, as they called them back in the pre-FDR era, that were often run by counties. And so, we walked through a place like this that had been long abandoned, and that kind of lit the fire under me to do it. So if I figure if I were to ever join a paranormal research group, it would be for this exact reason, so that I could legally enter more of these places. Because like you, I talk a mean game sometimes on the old internet, but I don't want to go to jail. So I figure I got away with it once and I'm not going to tempt fate one more time. So I love how you gained entry into this world. Tell me like where all you went, just some highlights even. I don't expect you to run down the whole chronology, but I would love to know where all you went in this journey.
Well, the one place I did this for 2 years because the clerkship lasted 2 years and then I moved. But I'm still connected to those folks and still consider them to be friends. But the one place I never went was that one asylum. We never actually went back there like the whole time. They kept planning it and it kept getting canceled for some reason, which was frustrating. But we did some really cool places. And the whole experience, the group, the people in the group, it was incredible. You could write a book about it. I mean, I'll talk about some of the characters in a bit, but I mean, the type of places we went to. The great thing about Alabama in general is there's a lot of history there. So there are two very sort of old historic plantation style homes in Tuscaloosa. One of them that is very well kept, and one of them that was completely falling apart. And we actually kind of took that on as a project, and it's now been fully restored, in part because we worked with the Historical Society to raise funds through things like ghost tours. We would take people through and tell them the stories of this place. And in any event, so those were two places we went. There were actually three. There was another historic home that we went to, and it was so great because you would go after hours when it was closed. It would just be you and the caretaker. You would get to go places nobody else did. You would hear the stories that nobody else knew. It was amazing. There was a tavern that had been built in the early 1800s to serve the Capitol, which at one time had been in Tuscaloosa, but then had burned down. And so there was a tavern and a brothel, and we went to both of those. We did make it to the asylum that I mentioned for adolescents. That was an interesting place. Did a couple churches, did a former Civil War hospital that is located in the basement of a library. So the library is on top, and then they have like this door that's locked, and they don't let anybody go down there. But if you open the door, it goes downstairs, and then you see there's this sort of underground area that's kind of falling apart, but it's where they had this hospital. I mean, obviously 150 years ago for the Civil War. So that was one of the places we did. We did a few restaurants. We did a few private locations, people's homes. People would come to us. They would email us and they would say, hey, I've got this issue and, my kids are terrified or we're seeing visions. And they would want us to come out there. We had one, it was a college girl, and she just moved into this place and she was seeing this sort of male figure. She'd wake up at night and he'd be standing over her and stuff like that. Really, she would take a shower and she'd open the shower curtain and there he'd be. I mean, the kind of stuff out of a movie. And she just left.
Yeah.
So this had happened and she'd left. She was staying with a friend. When we went there, like all her stuff was there. It's like some story, like there's like breakfast on the table. I mean, just literally you could tell that she just went. And we would do these investigations for people. We did one, and this is also, and I promise you all these are true, but we did this one where these people were in this house and there was a cemetery across the street for them. It wasn't really across the street. It was like a very old cemetery. So it was kind of in the woods. So there were some woods, and then there was a field that ran up to their house, and then there's their house. And they were having all sorts of issues. Their kids were seeing this man that they called the master. And the dad didn't believe it for a while, but then something happened where he believed it. And so they wanted us to come and do this thing. And we go outside and we walk around in this field for a little while. And we realize the cemetery is not just in the woods. It's like runs all the way up to your house. And probably you built your house on top of a cemetery, right? It's like something out of
classic poltergeist.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And it's like literally we found this like crumbling tombstone 6 feet from their window, from their like bedroom window or whatever. So, you do things like that. Then occasionally you would go to a place and you would realize, hey, you have a natural gas leak. So you probably should get that fixed. That might be why you're seeing ghosts, not because
Right.
they're actually ghosts because of that. And then one place that we are 90% sure was a meth lab, which that was also one of the reasons they were seeing ghosts. So we had some very interesting, crazy experiences that weren't even necessarily related to the paranormal or anything paranormal that happened. It was just really, as a sociological human experience, it was amazing.
I feel like a lot of discussion about the paranormal and about ghosts and things, when you can enter those discussions in an open and honest way, you will often find elements like that as part of it. I want to tread lightly in some ways when we talk about these things, because I feel like anytime I've tried to bring up possible alternate reason that somebody might have seen a thing, I don't even do that anymore. In fact, I don't even solicit those views. If somebody tells me a ghost story, I just kind of go, I wonder if that was it or if it could be attributed to something else. And so the idea of like a gas leak or being next to some other chemicals, as would be in a meth lab, that could possibly be generating this, or high stress levels among the person seeing the things. Maybe they're not sleeping. Maybe they are, I don't know, maybe they're taking Ambien. I just feel like I want to look at like the full history. Did you get into the full history of the people? Like, did they offer you that information, or was it really just about investigating the place?
So yeah, we would do all of it. And what was really interesting about this group, and I can't speak for any other group because I've never been a part of any other group. They really considered themselves to be a scientific organization. Like they looked at this very much as, we're not just going out there to get scared. We are going out there because we really want to find some kind of proof, some sort of concrete proof about these ghosts, right? I mean, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to prove that something paranormal was going on. So, one of the things that we always did was we always assumed there wasn't anything paranormal. That was always the way we went in. Assume there's nothing paranormal, try and debunk it, figure out what this could be other than something paranormal. And we tried to do things that were verifiable. So for instance, and this actually caused a split in the group and some people left.
Well, I was going to say, that's a very scientific method you're taking, which is fantastic. Like, I love hearing that.
One thing we did not do is we didn't use psychics or, mediums or any of that stuff. We're always careful to say it's not that we're saying it doesn't exist or it's not a thing. It's just, it's not provable, right? Like there's no way for me to know whether or not you are actually psychic or you're actually sensitive to spirits, or if you're just making it up, or if you truly believe it, but it's not true. And so that was sort of one of our rules. We don't do that. Like I said, there were a couple people who left because they didn't like that. They wanted to have seances in graveyards, which is fine, but that wasn't sort of what we were in it. So yeah, when we would go to these places, we were always trying to figure out, infrasound, do you have like a weird fan that's not working correctly? I mean, there's all sorts of little things that can cause people, and we know this, that can cause people to see things that aren't really there.
Isn't that something from Dyatlov Pass? Wasn't that a theory? Or is that catabolic winds? Wasn't it something along those lines?
Infrasound is one from Dyatlov Pass and catabolic winds. Both of them are.
All right.
But one really interesting thing with infrasound is they've done studies and they've done tests, and there are certain sounds, certain frequencies that if you hear them, they will cause you to feel fear. It's kind of like the whole Havana syndrome that get far afield, right? Like this notion that if you aim frequencies below the sound which you can hear, and I think both below and above there is a frequency that causes you to feel fear, and it can cause you to things like hallucinate and feel like someone's watching you, and all of those things that are consistent with experiences with the paranormal. So those are all the kind of things that we tried to rule out whenever we would go into these situations.
I had a list of questions, and now I'm just coming up with more questions off the top of my head. So what kind of gear did you go into a place with?
When I first joined, the things that I had to have was a backpack, a flashlight, and a voice recorder. And that was it. You know, it was good if you had a camera. It was good if, you know, if you wanted to buy some of the fancier things, you could. Somebody bought me a headlamp, which was nice to have. It was like a gift to me when I joined. And basically you need the flashlight because most places we went either didn't have electricity or it was nighttime. And the voice recorder, because there is a whole, I'm not going to call it a pseudoscience, but I don't know what to call it. There is a science, we'll use science, and I don't want to offend any scientists out there. Yeah, science adjacent. That's a good, I mean, look, these people are kind of like alchemists or early astronomers. I mean, they're people who believe there's something out there and they're trying to find it and they're trying to figure out scientific ways to prove it. So there are all these theories in the community about how this works. And if it works that way, then it leaves a trace. And if it leaves a trace, you should be able to find it. And one of the theories is essentially that ghosts, spirits, whatever you want to call them, whatever they are, and people had different views, interdimensional beings, ghosts, demons. I mean, there were some people who believed that bad things that happen sort of leave a mark on the world. The energy remains there. And that if the energy is sort of re-energized, you can see it happen again. Right? It's kind of like if you turn on the TV, all of a sudden you see an image. If you turn it off, the image goes away. So energy was like a big thing. And the idea that spirits or whatnot needed energy to manifest led to people believing things like EVPs, which are electronic voice phenomena, which is probably the biggest thing that people do in ghost hunting. And that's why we had these recorders, because the idea is that when you start a recorder, there is static there. And that what you essentially are doing is the static is providing energy for the spirit to use to communicate with you. So you basically, the most basic thing, and anyone listening can do this in their home. And I'll tell you a story about why you shouldn't in a second, but anybody can do this in their home. You sit down, you turn off the lights, you turn on your recorder, you wait a few seconds, you ask a question. You wait a few seconds, you ask a question. You wait a few seconds, you ask a question. Then you listen to it again, and you listen to the static, and you see if you hear anything in the static. There are concerns about that. There's pareidolia and other sort of phenomenon where your brain will make patterns out of static. So you have to be careful with it. Mm-hmm. But it is a very interesting sort of thing. And if you do it, you will invariably have circumstances where you hear things that are in answer to your question. And that's always sort of an interesting thing. So that was, when you go to the gear, that was the most basic thing. In addition to that, we also had a whole setup with a DVR. We had wireless cameras. We had infrared. We had heat seeking, not heat seeking, but heat flare. I forget what they're called. Anyways, that see heat signatures. We had all those different cameras. We'd go around these places. We'd set up the cameras. You'd have one person whose job was to monitor the DVR. The worst part about ghost hunting, by the way, is after it's over and you have to go through all this stuff. Oh. And you did it for like 5 hours. And now there's like 10 cameras worth of footage. And you have to sit there and watch it. And you're like, I can't take my eyes off of this, because what if that's the second that the ghost walks by? That's really terrible. But anyway, so that's the basic gear of the ghost hunter. It's not that fancy. There are some sort of fancier things that people have out there, spirit boxes and stuff like that. But we didn't use that so much.
When you mentioned going over your footage, I remember when I was in high school, I was a big part of the TV production program and video club and all that. That was my bag. Some people play sports. I did video and band and all that. But when I first joined video club, the first thing they put you on is logging. And, they make it sound all official, but ultimately what it came down to, because we recorded all the sports games and we recorded so many other school events, was sitting with a pile of VHS tapes about yay high. And VHS tapes, because this was in the 90s, guys. And going through and watching all the raw footage with your log sheet and writing down anything notable that happened and any of the noobs that came into the video club. That's what they found out why there was a video club, was so they could get inductees to come in to the studio and watch hours and hours and hours of raw footage. So maybe you guys just needed a bunch of lackeys that didn't know any better.
Yeah, we definitely did
do that. Yeah.
because that was one of the not popular jobs.
It does put you in the position of, like you said, the pareidolia and all those things of possibly seeing things that aren't there, or wanting to see something so badly that you're reading into things. And, there are a lot of potential pitfalls there. Or like you said, you skip over something because you dared to blink. So the exhaustion sets in, the fatigue with your eyes and your ears and all that. So that's really hard. Just having had a taste of that, even in a non-paranormal perspective, I can tell you that is not fun at all. I don't recommend it, but it's a very essential part of any sort of documentation process. Now, I'm going to keep picking your brain, Brett, because this is fun. However, I also put out a call to my friends on Facebook. I have a lot of friends on there. And so I put out the call and asked them to tell me any personal stories that they had with a ghost or ghost-like entity, or something that they believed was an unusual, unexplainable, paranormal event. I could go online and find a number of these things, but I wanted to hear from people that I know, because it's easier to vet in a lot of ways. And I collated a small list. And so throughout the episode, I just kind of want to tell a ghost story, just a small one. And you could tell me what you think, and I'll tell you what I think. And it might just be even like, ooh, that's weird. And then that's odd. And then we move on. But I'm gonna go to my list right now and just pull one out of the hat and just take it as fact that these are people that I know. Okay. So the first story does come from a very close friend of mine. And I'll just say his name is Aaron. And that's all I'm going to reveal. But he called me this morning, and specifically because he wanted to tell me this before I recorded tonight. And so he has a friend who he didn't really trust her viewpoint, because she was a kind of a party girl, but she always claimed that she lived in a haunted house. Her house had a lot of angry spirits lurking around it. And they'd sometimes see a man kind of lurking around and in the backyard and stuff like that. That was weird, but he always disregarded it. But then somebody else who has experience with this house told him a story, and apparently she's a lot more credible, and he just kind of sat up and listened much more closely. And this one freaked me out a little bit. So apparently this group of people that live in this home, they were getting ready to take an overnight drive down to Florida for a vacation, and they were piling all their stuff into the car, and it was in the wee hours of the morning, because they were getting ready to do a very long drive. We're in Ohio, by the way. So imagine Ohio to Florida. That's about a 20-some-hour drive. It's not short. So the girl who had this experience, she realized she forgot to get her pillow. And so she ran into the house. There was nobody else in it at the time. She runs up the stairs into the bedroom, opens the door into her room, and suddenly the radio, her alarm clock radio, clicks on. And the only words that come out are, "We're up here, we're up here." And then it clicks off again. And then she got so freaked out that she grabbed the thing and ran screaming down the stairs. She was genuinely terrified. But just imagine hearing the radio click on, and those are the only words. It's a clip from a radio transmission, and then it just shuts off immediately. And that's it. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but just putting myself in the position of if that happened, I would probably be completely terrified. But it's involving an electrical phenomenon, right? And a lot of these do involve some sort of electrical phenomenon. The lights flicker, they turn on and off. I have that happen in my house as well, and I have no explanation for it. So is this something that is common among your experience, hearing radios click on, hearing TVs go on and off, things like that?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think one misconception people have, and they have it both because of paranormal shows and movies and everything else, is that paranormal events are big.
Right.
And that if you have paranormal, it's going to be huge and like the door's going to fly open and the spirit's going to walk through and it's going to be like, you're going to die. Right. That is not based on both the people who talked about things that happened to them and the things that happened when I was doing this. Paranormal events are small. And sort of the theory among the community is once again that this is really hard. It's very difficult for sort of a spirit or whatever it is that wants to communicate with you to do so. And like I said, it takes energy. So what does that mean? Okay. Why are there cold spots when there are hauntings? Well, the theory is that is the spirit taking energy so that it can manifest itself. Using radio waves, that kind of thing is actually fairly common. So common that one of the tools some people use, and I've never used it, is it's called like a spirit box. And the way it works is it is constantly scanning frequencies across the radio frequency. And you kind of ask a question and then it randomly, I don't know, it's hard to describe exactly how this works, picks stuff out of the radio frequencies to create the answers. Right.
That's like a digital like not digital,
exactly.
But like a Ouija board,
right.
But that you can hear.
Right. Yeah. And so, different people think different things about that. So yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff I think definitely happens. One thing that happens that is inexplicable, and it happened to me all the time, and I do not know to this day why it happens. Well, I mean, based on theory, I know what happens. The other thing, when you go on one of these things, in addition to all the sort of equipment you're supposed to have, you're supposed to take some water, and you're supposed to take a ton of batteries, because you will take new batteries and you will put those new batteries into your flashlight, and you'll put those new batteries into your recorder, and then you'll try and turn your flashlight on, or you'll turn your recorder on, and the batteries will be absolutely dead. And like the draining of batteries, like the instantaneous draining of batteries, is something that happens so often on these that you could go and absolutely nothing paranormal happens, but half the people, their stuff doesn't work. And it's literally like you have a pack of batteries that you just bought from Costco and you took them out and they're gone.
Okay, listen, if that happened to me, if I were out in the field doing this and that happened more than once to me, that would really affect me in a big way. Because like you said, these aren't big events. You're not going to get a James Wan movie when you go to a haunted house. That is Hollywood. I firmly believe that. And that's without even injecting whatever I think about ghosts into this equation. So it's always the little things that get me. It's always the subtle stuff. And my interest in horror is the same way. I love like a trickle, like an icy trickle, as opposed to like an all-out onslaught of the senses. So you describing that with the batteries just, again, kind of gave me a chill, because that is not something that happens in a lot of instances. You don't pull out a brand new pair of batteries and plunk them into something and have them dead, and have that happen over and over and over again.
And people always said it would happen, and I was always like, okay, sure. I was always kind of the skeptic of the group. I mean,
right.
I was like Mulder. I wanted to believe, but I was also kind of like Scully. I was like, I kind of need you to prove this to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I can literally remember one of the times that happened. I was walking down the sort of broken driveway to this abandoned asylum we were going to, and I'm putting the batteries into my voice recorder, because everybody did this. You always put brand new batteries into your equipment before you started, because you didn't want it to stop in the middle of the investigation. And I put the brand new batteries in, and I started recording, and I did the thing where it's like, this is Brett, we're at this place, it's this time. And I walked up from the driveway onto the steps of the building. And as soon as I stepped on the steps, my recorder stopped, and I looked down at it, and I've got the like no battery thing sign on my recorder. And I'm like, wow.
Okay. I don't like this. All right. I didn't expect that I would be freaked out while we're doing the show. That is weird. Okay. That's very, very weird. That just, anybody listening to this right now, I don't care how hardened you are, a realist and whatnot, that's so wild to me. I wasn't expecting to hear that. That is really crazy.
Yeah. And it's one of those things like, okay, maybe you got a bad pair of batteries. Okay. If that happened once, but
I don't want to get too personal here, because, I respect your boundaries. However, growing up or throughout your childhood, your teenage years and whatnot, I mean, did you have any experiences at all that pointed you in a certain direction in terms of your belief? You talk about being a mix of Mulder and Scully, which I completely respect and relate to. I'm the meat in the sandwich between Mulder and Scully. But did something ever happen to you that made you more of a believer or not?
So no is the answer to your question. So I grew up in a religious household. I'm religious to this day. I'm a Christian. I believe in life after death. I believe in the immortality of the soul. I believe in all those things. And so I have sort of a natural inclination to believe there's more to life than just materialism. And I've always wanted to believe in ghosts, but I've never had an experience with it. And it's one of those things I really wanted to have. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to join the group, to see if I would have that. And it was funny because you had people who really spanned the spectrum on this. I mean, you had people who were just true believers who saw a ghost every time they turned around, right? I mean, right. And it's one of those things. It's like, why does that person have an experience every time we go out? Is it because they're just attuned to this? Is it because I don't think anybody was lying. I don't think there was a single person in that group who would have lied about anything that happened to them. But that doesn't mean that certain people aren't more susceptible to thinking that the cool breeze coming from the window is actually a ghost, right? Right. And I remember one time somebody wanted to do the Ouija board with me. And I was like, okay, let's do a Ouija board.
This is a great segue. I was going to ask you about a Ouija board. So please. Yeah.
So we sat there with our Ouija board with our hands on the planchette, and it just doesn't move. And it doesn't move for like forever. And we're trying to warm up the board and we're doing all the things to do, and it just doesn't move. And she looks up at me and she goes, "You have dead eyes." And what she meant by that was not that like some sort of spiritual thing. It was that like I was some sort of block to anything paranormal happening, because I was so not in tune with sort of the spiritual world or whatever. So I definitely did not have as many experiences as maybe some other people.
There's a lot I can say to that. What you just said, that is very interesting to me. My son, Nate, he practices some, paganism, spiritualism, witchy type stuff. He loves his tarot. He loves his divination type stuff. He loves crystals. I mean, his room is crammed with rocks of all kinds. And he has taken me on a small journey through some of this stuff. And even he is not a fan of the Ouija board. And of course, me being me, one day I was out and I picked one up because we didn't have one. Now, I will say this, my family, I did not grow up per se in a religious household. I grew up in a household of, let's say, my mom went through her born again phase and put me into some hardcore church in my late childhood between the ages of 10 and 12. And my dad grew up in a very Methodist family, and then he rejected all that because the church rejected him, and there's a whole thing there. So I grew up in a house of just sort of a mixed thing, right? But even they both unite on their not liking the Ouija board. Apparently my aunt got really involved in using one a lot, and she had a very bad experience. And in fact, this is part of the family lore. You get to hear about my Aunt Nancy and the fact that she got such a bad experience with the Ouija board that she got addicted to using it. And then she put it in the closet to try to get away from it. And then she heard growling coming from the closet. That was like a story used to terrify me as a child so that I would never touch a Ouija board.
I can see how that would work.
Yeah. So that did work for a number of years. And now being in my 40s and just feeling like I'm ready to tempt the fates. I'm not ready to take anybody else's word for anything anymore. If there's something that wants to infiltrate my soul, then let's see. I'm going to throw the gates open and see what runs in. And so Nate, finally, he's like, well, we can use this if I draw some sigils on the back of it. And I'm like, all right, whatever. So he puts these protective wards, he draws these sigils on the back of the Ouija board before we use it. And he brings in his special rocks and his candles and all this and sets it up on the dining room table. And it's about 1 a.m. And we do know for a fact that an older gentleman did die in our home. The previous owner's husband died of a long illness. So I know of at least one death that occurred in this house. And so I thought, hey, at the very least we can say hi to him if he's hanging around, or whoever else might be in here. This house is from the early was built in the early 60s. So there could be some history here. So we started doing it. We put our hands on the planchette, and it did move. Now, I have no explanation for that. I don't think I moved it, but it moved. And then we were asking questions, but it didn't move a lot. It was just little inchy moves toward like a few letters, but we're looking at each other going like, what the hell is going on here? It didn't really answer our questions. It was such a slow move that we were both impatient enough. We're like, all right, whatever. We're not interested. If you're not going to talk fast, then, we don't have time for this conversation right now. And then Nate thinks that the sigils probably just weakened it. So if the sigils weren't on it, then maybe we could have had a better conversation with whatever was moving it. But I'm also thinking, do I go out and buy another Ouija board and we don't put the sigils on it? Or do we just chalk it up to, I don't know, maybe we were moving it and just not realizing it? Because I think if two hands are on it or more, and one person does a minute movement, does the tendency then mean that the other person kind of helps push it in that direction that it seems to be moving? Like, how does this work?
Well, so the skeptics would tell you that, yeah, it's all unconscious. You don't really, it's like you said, basically minor movements sort of lead to other things.
Yeah.
And maybe that's true. I mean, I'll tell you, my experience, my negative experience actually kind of, I don't know about that, because we did that and literally we just sat there for 15 minutes and the thing never moved at all. I mean, not an inch. So if there was any sort of, we both wanted it to move, neither one of us consciously or subconsciously moved the damn thing. So I don't know. But so I can't say for certain. I think it is interesting. Look, one of the things I'll say about this, you're talking about your aunt. I don't know if it's a danger, but just be careful if you get into stuff, because I don't know how much people really want to know, right? I mean, how much do you want to know if your house is quote unquote haunted?
Right. I don't. We are currently having a problem right now. All of our lights in the house, pretty much with few exceptions, are smart bulbs. So they're all connected to the internet. We turn them on with the power of our voice. Light switches are kind of dead in our house. We turn everything on with Philips, whatever. And there's one particular pair that constantly now just randomly turn on with no command, with nobody else in the house. Even I can sit there and that light will just turn on, and that wasn't happening before. And my husband and I were constantly going like, what the hell? And then he, being the sort of engineer brain that he has, and is coming up with an internet reason why this is happening. Like, oh, it's probably, the thing connecting them is malfunctioning. And that makes complete sense. That's very logical. But at the same time, I'm like, that doesn't happen with the other lights. Why is it just happening with this pair? And why is it in the room that we're in and not, and it only happens when we're in the room? I'm coming up with all this stuff like, okay, yeah, maybe it is an internet malfunction, but it feels really weird. So when something like that is happening, it's weird what the brain does, or when somebody tells you like something unusual is happening, what happens in your brain, Brett? If I'm going to read another ghost story here in a minute, but when you hear a ghost story, what happens in your brain? Do you immediately run to the skeptic side of like, it could be this, it could be that? Is your prosecutorial brain looking for the evidence to then make that, or do you take it at face value? What happens in your head?
I mean, I try and be of two minds of it. If somebody tells me a story or something happens to them, I'm always going to respect their story, and I'm always going to give them the benefit of the doubt that what they believe happened is what happened. Now, of course, I'm also analyzing it and thinking, what are the possibilities here? I mean, it's like orbs. Orbs are big, right? People love orbs. They love to go into a building where there's dust falling from the ceiling and take a flash picture. And then they're like, look at all these orbs. Obviously, there's ghosts all around. And no, that's the light from your flash hitting the dust, and it looks like there are orbs. That's not actually real. Not saying you couldn't have orbs. I mean, if you're looking at a video, for instance, I mean, this is one way you could do it. And I've seen videos like this. If you're looking at a video and you literally can see, you got sort of your night vision and you can see falling like snow dust if you're in an abandoned building. You'll realize then how much you're breathing in, and you see it falling like snow, and you can tell the air currents, and you can tell which way the air currents are going because you can follow the falling dust. If you see an orb moving against the flow, doing things like stopping, moving up and down, moving around, that is a little bit more concrete than just we took a flash picture in a place and saw it. So yeah, I'm always trying to figure it out and figure out what the alternate explanations could be. And that was something I always kind of did in the group. And I was probably the least believerish of the people. And one of the reasons for that was every single person in that group, there are about 20 people in that group, every single one of them, except me, was there because something had happened to them. So they started from a position of belief. And it was people, we had one guy was a bounty hunter, one guy was a cop, one guy was a nurse, one guy was in the military, one lady was a school teacher. I mean, these people came from every possible background. I was a lawyer, every possible background. And they would tell me their stories, and they would say, this thing happened to me. And that's when I decided I need to know what that was, right? Like the police officer who was there, he was a city cop, and he was great because he knew how to investigate stuff and to document stuff, and was really just a investigator to his core. He was out hunting one day, and he said he had finished up. He really hadn't seen anything. He said it was weird. It was like there were no animals around. It's crazy. He didn't even see a bird. And so finally, the sun's setting. He's like, well, I guess there's literally no animals in this forest, which, clue. So he like climbs down from his, oh God, what do you call those? You hunters out there all know what I'm talking about.
Blind?
A blind. Yeah. Like a blind up in the tree. He climbs down from that, and he turns around, and about 10 feet from him is what he described as a shadow person, which is another thing you see, which is basically a full body apparition, as you might say in Ghostbusters, that is completely black except for where the eyes would be. And he said he turned around and he looked at this thing, and it looked at him, and then it turned around and disappeared into the forest. And he was like, after that happened, I was like, I have to know what that was and why it happened. And that's why he joined the group. And who am I to say that guy didn't see exactly what he thought he saw, right? So,
right.
I mean, I am a skeptic, but I'm not. I don't like skeptics who are just rude,
jerks.
They just assume. Well, I'm a skeptic, so therefore the story you're telling me is false. That's how I view skepticism, and to me, that's not real skepticism. That's just denialism. And if you're just going to deny it, then what's the point in even listening to people's stories? So I like to hear what they say.
I'm going to say something that I would never say on your show because I have to be more respectful. I'm just going to say it on my show because it's my show. I'm a very secular individual. I am a non-religious person. However, I'm not an atheist. However, atheists are assholes. Like 90% of them. Come at me, atheists. Like, just fucking come at me. I am so ready. No, that bothers me. It bothers me when people are like that. Ultimately, like you, I don't ever want to patronize anybody. I'm very afraid of doing that because I don't want people to think that I'm belittling their experience. But I do tend to lean on the phrase of, I believe that you believe. I believe you. I believe or I believe that you're believing this, that you're seeing this. I don't think you're lying to me. I think you're being very honest in what you're saying. For instance, my mom has countless. She is, I want to say a little bit of an antenna, and I have experienced a bit of her wild ability to guess things. And I share a tiny bit of that. I am highly intuitive. My gut has rarely steered me in the wrong direction. And when it has, it's been pretty catastrophic, but 95% of the time, I would say intuitively, I can get a sense. I can get a read on people. I don't think it's supernatural. I just think it is an antenna thing in the brain. But she will tell me stuff, and I completely believe what she's telling me. I don't know if I can attribute it to the supernatural, but she is the most believable person ever. She lost her first husband, my brother's father, when she was very young. She was about 18 because she had my brother as a teenager, and he passed away of natural causes. And she can very vividly tell me how she remembered him coming to her and putting a blanket on her when she was in bed, not long after he passed. And she'll tell me stories of when my grandmother was passing away, her mother, of cancer, and how my grandmother spoke of how she saw family members that had long passed, and she was talking to them in the hospice, before she died. She has so many stories, and I can't deny that. Really, in my head, I'm thinking as she's telling me these stories, especially with my grandmother, who was dying of lung cancer, but her liver, it had gone into her liver and her liver was failing. And when that happens, a lot of chemicals are released in the body, very toxic chemicals that your liver normally cleans out for you. But whenever they aren't cleaned out, they go to your brain and they can cause a lot of hallucinations, delusions, other disordered thinking. It's literally your brain in toxic soup. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is the result of a dying body. My grandmother might see her dead sister in the room with her because they were very close. And when the body is dying, maybe that's something your brain kind of fires off, are those like little areas of the brain, showing you these things. Maybe they are hallucinations. Maybe it isn't necessarily a ghost. Maybe it's a hallucination. So there are little things like that I was thinking, but my mom, definitely was inclined to believe that her Aunt Barbara was in that room with my grandmother as my grandmother was dying. And she's seen this in other cases too. She's been in other hospice type situations with friends and family, and they all have that kind of experience to talk about, which I find fascinating. And in fact, I'll just segue this into another ghost story because we've covered a good bit of what is in this next one, both on the hospice end and the electrical phenomenon end. This is my friend Jean. She's an ICU nurse, and she has always seen countless people. She feels she's kind of an antenna. It's almost become like a normal thing to her. But she talks a lot about her patients who have also seen past family members as they themselves are dying. And then she talks about how I had to kind of condense her story because she has so much. And Jean, you're wonderful. I'd love to talk to her more on this one-to-one. But her father-in-law passed away, and she inherited his car. And first the electric went south in that car, and then it went south in their other car, and then it started going bad in the house. Like as soon as they brought this car home, things started going wrong. And it culminated, and this is her words, it culminated one day about 4 a.m. when all of a sudden a couple of radios in our house started playing simultaneously full blast. One was static and a weird talk radio show, like stuck between two stations. But the radio in the kitchen was blasting the song A Little Less Conversation by Elvis. That song now terrifies me, and I probably won't listen to it again. But she said it scared the hell out of her. At the same time, some of the lights in the house were not on, but they were glowing a soft orange. My husband and I jumped out of bed, and as I ran to turn off the music, he opened the door to the basement to check the fuse box, and the light in the hall at the top of the steps was glowing like a weird orb. There's an orb. He went down to the basement, shut off the power, checked the fuses. We ultimately had to have an electrician come that day to completely redo our entire fuse box, which was super expensive even back then. There were no storms in the area, no outside reason that we would have had this weird power surge at that time. Anyhow, after that, I smudged the house, the cars, garage for the first time in my life because I was willing to try anything, even though I didn't 100% believe it would work or that we were experiencing anything paranormal. So she's still very skeptical when this is going on. In the end, though, after the electric was rewired and the circuit breaker was fixed, they haven't had any other issues. So I find that really interesting as well, right? And she told me this as almost a skeptic herself. Like she still isn't sure if it was paranormal, but it was so weird that these light phenomenon were happening. We have the dead father-in-law's car. We have all these things. And it's like, I believe her completely, 100%. Like, Jean, I completely believe you. But if this had happened to you, Brett, What would you think? I don't know, honestly.
Well, I mean, I don't know either. And, the boring answer is it was some sort of power surge you can't really explain. And it happened and never happened again because it happened for some random reason, right? I mean, that's the boring answer. And maybe that's the right answer. But I don't know. I feel like it's funny because science is all about pushing the boundaries and questioning everything and discovering new worlds, but
Falsifying things that it
and
has to be
falsifying things.
falsifiable. That's the
And
whole
right.
part of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the problem with that is, yes, that's true. And we'll give you that. But at some point on the fringes, you can't falsify things,
Right.
like, for instance, if the universe is a hologram,
Hmm.
how does that affect your view of whether or not there might be after images of people who've lived long ago? I mean, it's like the fundamental foundational questions we have no answer to, and we don't really know how anything works. We act like we do. We're a bunch of Newtonians living in an Einsteinian world, and Einstein's probably wrong about everything, right?
Oh, yeah.
But we're so confident. We are so confident that all this stuff is impossible. And it's just funny to me how confident people are. And we are so ignorant. We are on like the very cusp of beginning to understand the
Right.
way the world works
Yeah.
and the deeper questions. And we don't even know why people have consciousness. We are so ignorant in so many ways. And so that's one of the reasons I'm always willing to give or to have an open mind about this. And like I said, and like you said, everybody in that group's had an experience.
Yeah.
You're reading people's experiences right now. Millions of people have had these experiences. And you can ask questions like, well, if everybody's seeing ghosts, why aren't they taking pictures of them? How do you know you can take pictures of them?
Right.
You couldn't see a microbe until Leeuwenhoek or whatever his name is invented the microscope. Maybe we just don't have the technology to tap into whatever this is. It's hard to explain, and you can take individual things and you can try and explain it away, but there are so many examples of this. And I'll give you another one from just my experience. And this goes back to the story I was going to, a warning about investigating your own house. So the group had a couple guys who had founded it, and one of them, who I'm friends with to this day, he and I actually ended up writing a couple books, and I'll hawk those real quick. Haunted Tuscaloosa and Haunted Alabama Black Belt. If you want to read ghost stories, go pick those up. And he did all the research and I did all the writing, and it was just sort of great teamwork. But in any event, he got into it because he had a friend who ended up being the co-founder who was really into this stuff. And I'll tell you about that guy in a second because that guy was really interesting. But he had just moved into a new house. He and his wife are both in the military, and his wife was on leave, or not on leave. She was on duty, and they had just had kids who were like 6 months old. He was in his living room, and they had a crib in the living room, and he would put the baby in the crib, his daughter in the crib, and she would go to sleep, and he would read and stuff, and the dog's there. And he said that they had just moved in this house. They just started the setup. And basically, with his wife gone, he had wanted that crib in the living room because he wanted to have a place for his daughter to be. So he moves it in there. And the first day he moves it in there, his dog, all of a sudden, like at some point, his ears perk up, and he gets up and he walks over to the corner where the sort of the crib is. And he stares into the corner. And then he starts kind of lightly growling, and then he ends up barking. Of course, he wakes up the baby and he gets mad. He's like, dumb dog. Next day, same thing happens. At some point, the dog gets up, he walks over in the corner. And so this guy's like, this is very strange.
Right.
But he doesn't know what to do. So he calls his buddy who's really into this stuff. And his buddy says, do you have a voice recorder? And the guy's like, no. He's like, well, go buy one and keep it with you. And the next time this happens, just start recording. Just start recording. You don't have to do anything else. Just start recording. So the guy, he goes off, he buys a voice recorder. He goes back, and the next day, sure enough, puts the baby down. At some point, the dog gets up and he goes over there. So he picks up the voice recorder and he starts recording. And he only records, because he doesn't know what he's doing, he only records for like 10 seconds.
Oh.
But he records for like 10 seconds and then he turns it off. Right. And then later that night, he listens to it. And when he listens to it, And I've heard this. I wish I had it, but I've heard this. You start playing it, and the first thing you hear is something that sounds like a little girl giggling, right? Like a little girl's laugh. And
Ooh.
then, as clear as day, you hear a little girl's voice start to sing, Jesus loves me. And right as she's about to say me, he turns it off. That's when he turns it off. And it's like, man, if you had just recorded for a minute, but basically you listen to that and you will be certain that you are hearing a little girl over there by that crib where that baby is asleep, giggling and singing Jesus loves me. And all this happened when the dog is going over there and growling in the corner. And so he listened to that and he was like, I'm never recording anything in my house again. And from that point, he moves his daughter out of the living room and basically never had anything else happen like that. But I mean, how do you explain that?
I can't. I will say that I watched Paranormal Activity 2 last night, and there are very strong elements of that you mentioned. In that movie, there is a baby, there is a dog, there is a very defensive dog in it, and we don't know why necessarily, but that's where my brain is returning to right now because I'm still kind of a little traumatized from watching that movie last night. But I have no rational explanation for that, especially if it's clear audio.
I mean, it's not as clear as day. I mean, you could say this is just what you're hearing out of it. It's really just crazy static that just happens to sound just like that. But man, I mean, it is, like I said, I wish I had a copy of it.
Oh, that song kind of haunts me just from my childhood, in general. And when you put it in the general context of a ghost child singing it, I mean, again, I think I'm not gonna have good dreams tonight. After this discussion, would you go back? Would you do this again? Would you go on another paranormal thing, assuming you had the time or could clone yourself, because you're probably the busiest person I know? So just imagine Brett could clone himself. Would that clone join another paranormal research group?
I mean, I would. I will say this. I really, really enjoyed it. You know how you do things sometimes in your life and it just feels like it sort of has an outsized importance
Yeah.
because we would meet at the library once a month. We would go on these ghost hunts maybe once a month, maybe a couple times a month if we were really busy. It wasn't like something that took up a ton of my time. Now, when you went, it was exhausting because you're doing it at night, right? So you're showing up at 9 and you're staying until whenever you want to leave. But it was exhausting in that way. So there would be that. But I really enjoyed it, and I really love the people. I love people, and I like people who are different and who come from sort of all different backgrounds. And that was what was so amazing about it. Like, I've never actually been a part of anything that had people that were that different.
Yeah.
Because you know how it is. Like, if you go to a church, there's the church where all the sort of white collar people go, and there's the church where the people in the country go, and it's just basically we self-select for everything. But this
Yes.
group was like it was a cross section of America, and I really loved getting to know those people as much as I enjoyed the ghost hunting part. So it would be something I would do again, as much for the camaraderie and sort of just meeting interesting, different, new people as anything.
I love that a lot. And I think you speak in many ways to the importance of why we should do things like this, and interact in different groups. And talked a little bit about this on an upcoming episode, the cults episode that I recorded that will be starting in the beginning of November. And my guest on that show, my friend Bart, he talked about how the pandemic has sort of stemmed a lot of our social abilities, or cut them off in a lot of ways, sort of stunted them. Young people in particular are having to deal, I think, with the repercussions of that. But he mentioned how there are workshops now that are just about learning how to talk to people. That's all it is. Like, just join this group or come to this seminar and learn how to talk to people, which is something that we would take for granted now. because we have cloistered ourselves away, both maybe for the pandemic reasons, but also I think for other reasons. I think we were heading in that direction anyway, even before the pandemic, of sectioning ourselves off from people that aren't exactly like us, that don't think like us, that don't believe like us, that aren't the same politically, that aren't the same religiously or socially or in any other way. So getting to become part of a group of people who are very different backgrounds, have different belief systems, and all that is healthy and so important. And I feel like we're drifting further and further away from doing that. So I love that you had that experience and that it was gratifying on that basis, because I feel like we need to be doing more of that. We need to meet more people and we need to get out there. I think all the time about joining, for instance, an astronomy club, because I have this fancy telescope that my mom got me for Christmas like many years ago, and I still really don't know how to use it yet. And I think to myself, man, there's like an astronomy club like 20 minutes away. I could like pack up my telescope and go like set up shop and see, Jupiter through my telescope. And I just don't. And I imagine that the people in the astronomy club are the same. We're all from different walks of life, but we love the stars, we love the planets, and we want to learn more about them. But that, if you drill down in that group, you would find again this cross section of different people from all walks. And I feel like that experience is lacking in a lot of ways in today's world. So I hope that people do go and join a group like that. It just sounds so cool. It makes me want to go and do it. Even the paranormal thing, I think that would be fun. And also going back to the same, like I said earlier, just to be able to get into some of these old buildings, because I want to do that so bad. Let's see here. I have another thing I want to share, because I don't want to totally end this. Well, we're not ending it yet, because I have another thing I want to talk to you about, a couple more things. But my friend Bren sent me an interesting story. And this is a classic. Like, it reminded me of a ghost story you told me about earlier. So her story is she had just moved to LA and was sound asleep with her boyfriend in her tiny apartment 1 block off of Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. A sudden powerful jolt woke me as though the bed had been hit by a sledgehammer. I opened my eyes to see a man standing over the bed with dark hair and a Freddie Mercury mustache, wearing a navy blue polo shirt and tight jeans, his right arm raised for a second blow. My heart stopped. I figured my boyfriend was already dead, so I closed my eyes, held my breath, and tried to shrink. After what seemed like hours, I peeked and he was gone. My boyfriend was fine and still snoring. The next morning, we were chatting with some neighbors in the courtyard of the tiny U-shaped apartment building about its history. One of the neighbors told us that, among other tidbits, just before my boyfriend moved in, 2 men had left the huge gay bar across Santa Monica Boulevard and stumbled into the little patch of grass just outside our apartment bedroom window between the back of the building and the storage shed. They argued, and then one of them stabbed the other to death. So a murder occurred on this property. And apparently there is a history there. LA is one of the most morbid cities in America, by the way. Like, I think I want to go to LA just to do all the celebrity like death tours and all that. But this one freaked me out because one of my biggest fears, one of my biggest phobias of all time is someone breaking into my home and I wake up and I see someone standing over my bed. And if that happened to me, I don't know what I would do. I can imagine what I might do, but I think I would do like I would close my eyes and just try to disappear. I think that would be my first inclination. Like, you're not there, you're not there, you're not there. And then you open your eyes and they're really not there. I think I would be so completely catatonic with trauma. I wouldn't know what to do with myself. And then you find out that the person who was murdered there maybe was that guy standing over your bed who was a ghost. I don't know, but I read this, and again, the hairs stood up on my arms because of the thought of waking up and seeing a man standing over my bed. I would lose my mind.
I would move.
I think she did. She's not, well, she's definitely not there anymore because she lives elsewhere. But oh yeah, I think I would have cleared out like that afternoon. I would have definitely left. But
What's like we said, just sort of going back to sort of the theories of these things. Stephen King has the whole bad place thing. right?
Yes.
That there are certain
Yes.
places that just, for whatever reason, because of the trauma that did happen there. I mean, this notion that, and I kind of like it, that what happens in a place affects the place. It's some basic level. And that, there's a reason that Gettysburg is the most haunted place in
Mm,
America, right? It's because really terrible things happened there over 3 days and a whole lot of people died. And that it leaves a mark. And that in certain circumstances, you can see that. I mean, it's I don't it's like a residual heat or something. I mean, this is all sorts of little scientific things that run through my head to think about that. But yeah, like a violent murder. I mean, these kind of things make sense. And it doesn't mean, and I think this is important, it doesn't mean that just because you're in a place where someone died, that something like that's going to happen. You
right.
know, for whatever reason, that might not have left the same kind of mark, or there might, who knows, because we have no idea why these things happen. There could be any number of reasons that the right event in the right place, in the right circumstances, at the right time later on, with the right atmospheric, whatever, and the television's on the right channel, all of a sudden, this thing can manifest and then will never manifest again. To me, and this goes back to the problem here. You talked about science. It needs to be repeatable. It needs to be verifiable. It has to be falsifiable, right? Like you can't do that with this stuff. I mean, maybe you
No.
could if you had a better understanding of it, but since you just have no real understanding of why it happens, you can't do that. And I don't know. And that was the thing that was so interesting about this group is because you had these people who weren't scientists and were really trying hard to approach this stuff from some sort of scientific view to try and figure out like what is it that's causing this to happen, and
Right.
can we repeat it, and can we figure out what circumstances and what environmental circumstances, to go back to the same place multiple times. Like there was one place they went often, which I wish I could have gone to, I never got to go to. They went on a sunny day, they went in the middle of the night, they went during a storm, they went during all these sort of different things to try and figure out what effect does this have on sort of what's happening. And I just think all that stuff's fascinating. And that is another reason that I really enjoyed it and would be willing to do it again, just because to me, the sort of search for knowledge that's part of the reason we're here,
Yes.
and that's why I'm willing to keep an open mind about this stuff. And I don't really understand why you wouldn't.
No. And I want to go and spend more time in some really weird and places with history because I feel like the more history a place has, the more I feel like you can feel its history around you. And I've been in some places that are very old. I mean, let's be upfront here. I mean, we live in the United States. It is a very young country and overwhelmingly so. I mean, when you compare it to Europe, a lot of European countries that go back many, many, many centuries. And here in the United States, on the East Coast, yes, you have, going back to about the 1600s or so, at least in terms of when the Europeans arrived and all that. But a lot of those places are no longer here. Here where I live, in Dayton, Ohio, most of our buildings are the oldest goes back to maybe late 1700s, but for the most part, 1800s and on is where we tend to get a lot of this. And even in those places, when I've been house shopping, because we've looked for real estate around here a few times, we walked through some of these houses that were, Victorian era. And there's something, there's something about these places, not all of them, but a few of them. And really the basements. I feel like the basements are the most terrifying part of these houses. I'm about 6 feet tall. And so when I go down into them, I can't even stand up straight in them. The floors are dirt. They're not even, concrete in a lot of them. And all I could think was just what was down here at one point. But then I start to think, am I really feeling that? Or is it my own fear projecting my own anxieties, my own, and, a little bit of claustrophobia, my own little bit of like, this is an old house, therefore it is creepy. Am I projecting that onto this place? I really don't know, but I can definitely say that I feel things that I can't explain. That whole thing about the energies and the residue and all that stuff that you mentioned way earlier. I feel like that's the thing that I feel more attuned to because I've never had what I would consider a paranormal event happen. I've never seen a ghost. I've never seen a form of a person. I've never had that. I've never seen anything move that wasn't like moved upon, that wasn't following the Newton laws.
Mhm.
So I've never just sat there and watched a cup move across the table or something like that. But again, I know people that have had those experiences. So who am I to say? Maybe one day.
I think it's interesting because I went to a lot of different places. I named a bunch of them and I'm more popping into my head. And it's hard to explain why, but there are certain places you would go that felt different.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, it was easy to explain because they were just naturally creepy. I mean, you go to a naturally creepy place, it's going to feel creepy. But there were plenty of times, like I remember one time we went to an abandoned theater. It had been abandoned for like 50 years. It was built in the early 1900s. The coolest thing about it was, and maybe this will affect my long-term health, but when you walked in to the big auditorium, there was a curtain, over the stage that who knows how long had been hanging there. And in big block letters written across the middle, it said asbestos.
Oh my
And
God.
I'm sure at the time that was a sign of great comfort, right? Because no way this theater is going to burn down. We got asbestos. But as we're walking through, I'm thinking, how great, asbestos. But we went into the sort of the bowels of that theater, and it was dark and it was dank, and it was the kind of place that should have been scary, and zombies should have been jumping out and eating you and all this other stuff. And I just remember going down there and it just felt like nothing. It was like,
Right.
this should be creepy, but it's not creepy.
Yeah.
And then you would go places and it would be like an office, but we did a restaurant one time. And you'd go to this restaurant, it's like a pizza restaurant, and it looks like any pizza restaurant in America. But it was like when you walked in the door, it just felt different. It felt heavy. And it's really hard to describe, and I can't explain why. And I'm sure there's some scientific reason for it, but it just wasn't always the case that everywhere you went, because you're prepared to be scared, it felt scary. It wasn't like that. But there were certain places that you would. And I'll give you another example. I told you about the batteries running down and walking down that driveway. Well, so there was a church and it was abandoned. And then there was this driveway that led to this asylum, which was also abandoned. We
Mm-hmm.
did the church first. So that was the first place we sort of investigated. And it was dead, and not in a good way and not in a spooky way. Like it did not feel, it felt like the bottom of that theater. It just felt like there's something going on, like out there. We did a few EVP sessions, felt like we were wasting our time. And then we left and we walked down that driveway, going to that asylum, and I'm putting my new batteries in, and that place was completely different. And when you walked through the doors of that place, it just felt different. It felt heavy. I mean, heavy is the best way I can describe it.
Yes. Yes.
So I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thing.
I've had that feeling a couple times. Well, one, the Ashmore Estates thing, which people can go and listen to that episode on my channel and see that when Chris and I did that. And that was a heavy moment. And then there have been times here in Ohio, there is a town called Waynesville, and it is purportedly one of the most haunted towns in the state. And the town largely survives by its antique industry. So there are a lot of antique stores, which already creates that vibe, right? Because a lot of people avoid antiques in general because they're afraid of the things that might be attached to them, which is a very, I can't say that that's not a thing. I've been in a lot of antique stores. That's a big tradition in our family. My parents do a lot of it. I've been in a lot of antique stores throughout my life, and I have certain objects myself that I've acquired from these places that sometimes I would like that creep me out a little bit. And also I watched Friday the 13th, the series, like religiously when I was a kid. So maybe that's playing into it a little bit as well. A show about just cursed objects, but that heaviness that you can't really explain is completely something that I can vibe with. I've had that feeling, and not everywhere. And it isn't just the fact that it's an old place. I've been in a lot of old houses. I've been in a lot of old buildings, and it isn't everywhere. In fact, in that town of Waynesville, there was a Amish restaurant called the Dare Dutchman that burned down a few years back. It was a landmark, a very popular place, and they've never rebuilt it. And for a long time, that burned out hulk of a restaurant, it was a big restaurant. Imagine a Cracker Barrel but like twice the size. Just imagine that, because Cracker Barrels are big. So imagine something twice the size of one. And, we were driving by one day, and because I'm a troublemaker, and it was the four of us, the kids and Ken and I in the car, and we're just out on a drive. And I saw the Dear Dutchman burned out Hulk, and there was nobody around. And of course, me being me, because I was driving, I'm just like, we're going to go check it out. And okay, so that was honestly the second time in my life I've trespassed, but only that's it. And so I'm like, we're going to walk through this burned out Hulk of a Dear Dutchman. It's been sitting there for about a year and a half or more. And so we did. We walked through this place, completely accessible. We didn't have to like break it in or anything. It was very open to anybody who wanted to walk up on it. And so we walked through it. I didn't feel a damn thing. I thought it was neat. I thought it was pretty cool. I was like, all right, we're in the kitchen, we're in the like dining room, we're like walking through the dining room, we're looking at some of the graffiti that people had sprayed around. I have a ton of pictures. I'll post them online at some point. And it was just a cool little thing. It was just like, now we can say we've been to the Dare Dutchman. That was like kind of the family joke. And then they raised all that down the following year, and now it doesn't exist anymore. So I didn't feel anything there, even though this place had been around a very long time. There was that element of like, I feel like I'm doing something wrong by walking through here. If a cop showed up, we'd probably be in trouble. But other than that, I didn't feel a damn thing. But I have felt things in other places that I can't attribute to anxiety or any other thing. I wanted to feel something, but I didn't. So maybe it isn't just about like the projection. Maybe it does come externally in some way too.
And I think there probably is something to be said for certain people are more sensitive or whatever than others. I mean, I don't think that's,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's an insane thought. I mean, I think
No,
that's probably true.
it's a very personal thing though. You know what I mean? Like I feel like maybe somebody else who walked through it would feel something.
And once again, maybe on a different day, you would have felt something. It's
Maybe.
just who can say exactly what it is.
What part of the lunar cycle are we in right now? That kind of thing.
One thing you mentioned about cursed objects. So I said the other guy, the co-founder of the group. So this guy, his house was like, it was kind of like the Warren Museum in Connecticut. So basically, at some point, he was always a guy who was in the paranormal. He was all over sort of the whatever those chat rooms were in the 90s, like the early internet.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
at some point, he gets a phone call, and it's a woman from up New York or whatever, and she tells him that she bought an antique platter and that she has decided the antique platter is haunted. And all sorts of bad things have happened to her. That at one point, there was Thanksgiving and they cooked this turkey, and she takes out this piping hot turkey and she puts it on the platter and she takes it to the table and they cut it and it's ice cold. And she's like, the platter is just like sucking the heat and like the life. And I have to get rid of the platter. And she had this whole thing about how the platter was from Louis the 14th and it was probably somebody's head was on it. And she had all this stuff, but she was convinced it was haunted. And so she's like, I got your number from this person who got it from this person, whatever. And they told me you might be interested in taking it. Like, I don't want money for it. I just want you to take it. And so the guy was like, sure, I'll take it. So she sends in the platter. And he would only get the platter out on special occasions, but she sends in the platter. Well, from that point forward, it was like the word got out that if you had something that was haunted, if you called this guy, he would take it. And over the years, he had collected all this stuff that was supposedly haunted or cursed. He had like one room where he had built these shelves up near the ceiling that it was just dolls all the way around the room. And it was all these haunted dolls that people had sent him. And he had memorabilia from all these different places. It was crazy. And people would just send it to him and he would collect it. And his house was this little mini museum. It was wild.
I want to be that guy. I have a very strong interest in creepy dolls and clown dolls. In fact, I have a lot of them. My kids hate this hobby of mine. When we were in our previous home, the place had built-in bookshelves on either side of a fireplace. And so those shelves were full of my creepy clown dolls and other creepy stuff that I would just find wandering antique malls. And not every clown doll would do. I had to commune with the thing. I had to know. My mom was very good at finding ones for me, and she would call me up. She's like, "Oh, we found you a clown," and I'm like, "Oh, did you now?" And then she'd send me a picture. She has a whole menagerie of clown like instrument playing, like cymbal bashing and drumming and all these things. And every time I would bring it home, especially Nate, he would just look at me like, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Listen, I want them specifically because they're scary." I don't know how to explain that to people other than it makes me feel alive. I don't know. For the same reason I watch scary movies, I want creepy stuff. So if somebody had cursed objects they wanted to get rid of, I would be that guy. I would absolutely. I'm putting out that call right now. You got a cursed object you want to get rid of? I will send you my address. I want it. Um, for the same reason, I think it's a fascinating thing because I think we can imprint into objects the same things we imprint into places. And I don't know that we all share that ability to see that thing into that object. If this was a horrible object, um, to one person, it might not read the same way to me, but I'll take it and we'll see what happens because I like throwing the dice that way. So yeah, I love that he did that. I really vibe with that. And that's one reason I love going to antique malls so much because I will find something that I am sure, like I'll see things like these old apothecary cabinets with the little doors in the drawers and like from like way, way, way back in the day. And I'm like, what sort of thing was dispensed from that? Who used that? And it's just, you start to think of the story of the person that first owned this when it was brand new. And it's just fascinating. I think objects are almost way more interesting to me than places, but maybe it's because I can't get into the places. So I'll just take the objects.
Yeah, I mean, I was a big fan of the cursed objects. I really was.
Oh,
It
it's
was,
great. It's great.
and each one had a story, you know?
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
stories too.
Every object has a story in some way, shape, or form. And I love being able to put those on display or curating certain things. I think I just love clowns. Really particularly, but creepy dolls. And my mom has a huge collection, and I have been told that I will get them when she's gone. So I'm just saying, I mean, I'm like, I don't care about the money or any of the estate, or like, mom, just make sure I get the dolls. I don't care what else you can give Brandon, my brother, like anything else. Just give me those dolls. I want one of them even winds up and like crawls, and it's like full baby size, and it like crawls, and it's from the 30s. It's just like a wind up thing. Oh my God. She named her Rachel. I can't wait to have her. But so another common ghost, well, I don't want to say common like to denature it, but like listener Darren, he lives in San Diego, and again California, just full of ghosts. He worked at the Whaley House, which is apparently a pretty well-known haunted landmark in that city, and he was a docent there for a long time. And again, a lot of people died in this place. It's very infamous, and he would hear things, the employees saw things. I mean, this is pretty common. We have a lot of like hotels. I think hotels are fantastic. Did you ever go to a hotel? Was there ever a hotel experience in your ghost hunting?
No, I don't think we ever did a hotel that I can remember.
See, that could be really an interesting place. I think, well, 1408, Stephen King kind of covers that gambit when he talks about in that story about like how many people died here or had their last horrible moment here, or had bad thoughts in this room, or was sick here, or when you think about all the stories a room can absorb of all the human experience, I think a hotel is almost like the best and the worst of humanity in one room. You could have your most intimate moment in that room, and then you could also have your worst moment in that room. You could do things to yourself in that room if you're like all alone. You know what I mean? There's a lot of opportunity, I think, for a hotel to be extremely haunted. But then, I hear positive stories too. My friend Tiffany sent me one about, she went to a tarot reading, and, she, a friend of hers who has kind of medium like tendencies, she told her something very detailed about her grandmother that nobody else would know. And, that really touched her, and it gratified her. It made her feel better. So the ghost experience doesn't always have to be creepy, doesn't always have to be negative in some way. I think you can definitely get a sense of like gratification or feeling better after having an experience. She wanted to send me that because she thought I would just only talk about the creepy stuff. So Tiffany, I did a positive spin on it for you.
Well, one thing that was interesting about a lot of the houses we would do, so the private residences we would do, the people didn't necessarily have negative experiences there and really just wanted someone to come in and say, number one, you're not crazy. And number two, yeah, it seems like there probably is something going on. And that's all they wanted. They didn't need them exercised, and we didn't do that or anything like that. They just wanted to know they weren't crazy and to know this was a real thing. And then they were fine with it. Their
Right.
experiences weren't negative. And always thought that was interesting.
I think it is reassuring for a lot of people. If they have that experience, then if you desperately want to believe or know that there is life after this life, then if you have that experience, it can be very validating and gratifying and comforting. Death is a scary subject for most people, even the people that say, I'm not afraid of death. I think that there's always an element there because it is the great unknown in a lot of ways. In fact, I think that's why this is such a huge interest for so many people, right? It's our opportunity to grapple with the unknown and try to answer some of those big existential questions of why we're here and what is our purpose and how do we get through this world and this life and all its trials and all the things that seem to be going wrong all around us, because that's all we hear day in and day out is negativity and why we should be scared and why we should be worried for the future. And, and all this, we see all this chaos, and that's only getting worse as time goes on, that the stuff that we hear, because we're just constantly exposed to so much information on a daily basis. But I find myself feeling like if I knew for a fact that when I died, that I was going to continue on in some form, that I was conscious, like my consciousness was going to continue on, or that I would be a ghost. If I knew that, I don't know that I would be glad. I mean, I hate to say that because it's like part of me feels like, once I'm done here, then I'm done. Whatever the next form is, I don't want to know about this form. I want to like leave this body and go on and into something else and not have the knowledge that I was this person, if that is what it's going to be. So the idea that I could be a ghost actually scares the hell out of me. That doesn't comfort me, only because I just feel like once I've lived this life, I kind of want to be done with it. I don't know if that's too dark or cynical or I don't know. I wouldn't have said that probably even 10 years ago. But now I feel like in middle age, I feel like, yeah, when I'm done here, I'm done. And I don't want to be a ghost. Somebody call in the medium from Poltergeist and tell me to go to the light, because it's like I don't want to haunt anything. So I don't know if it's comforting. I mean, do you find it comforting if there is an afterlife, or if you could be a ghost? I mean, do you want to be a ghost, Brett?
It's a great question. And there's all sorts of different ways you could be a ghost, right? And so this is like, I guess, Patrick Swayze ghost. Is that what we're
Oh,
describing?
oh, well, I mean,
So
uh,
you're
uh,
just sort of, yeah, you're just sort of
you bring up Patrick
here,
Swayze. I mean, all questions are out of my brain now.
right?
All the words are gone.
Right.
Sorry.
Or Sixth Sense. I mean, any of those sort of settings where it's just a person who has died and now they're just sort of continuing on
Mm-hmm.
about their business, but no one can see them. I mean, I don't know. On the one hand, you'd have all the time to like go haunt a library and read all the books you want to read. I don't know. That's a great question.
That would be
And
cool to be in a library. That's like, well, it's not quite the same, but like in City of Angels, that movie with Nicolas Cage, like
mhm.
all the angels are just in library, like all the time. That's where they commune or whatever. That sounds awesome. Like if I could just stay there and not say watch my kids, or my what if my husband got remarried, or I don't want to watch that. I don't want to like be a
Right.
part, you know what I mean? So
I think I'm with you. I would rather have some sort of either move on entirely to something else, or if I got to stay here, I'd rather be like reincarnated.
I would be pissed. I would probably be the angry ghost. Like if I were forced to stay here and witness things I didn't want to witness, then I would probably be like the vengeful spirit. I don't, because I want out. I don't want to be part of this anymore. Like once I'm gone, I feel like I've earned my ticket to the next level,
Right.
whatever that
Whatever it
is.
is. Yeah.
So I would be pissed off, like, wait a minute, are you telling me I gotta like watch people and hang out in the life that I had? No, 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 no. We're done here. We're going on to the next ride. But I always feel like here's where we're getting really existential and kind of talking like abstract. I feel like a lot of the work that I do, and I suspect this is part of the reason you do the work that you do, is it's a way of saying that I was here, I mattered, I did something. We're doing a podcast, we've written books, we've written stories, we are active on social media. You do vital law work. I put myself out in the public to interact with people and try to make an impression on them and help them in some way. You want to help people too. And because it's all part of our desire to make as much impact as we can with the time that we have, because we realize we are mortal creatures and we want to immortalize at least a part of ourselves. And I think that's the drive behind a lot of artists, probably most, even if they don't know it or realize it or express that directly. And so part of me feels like if we knew for sure that there was an afterlife, that we could be ghosts, that we would die and we would carry on in some form from what we are now, would we feel as driven to create and build those legacies that we do here with the knowledge that we are in fact mortal beings? And so I wonder, what does a world look like that is completely aware of an afterlife in a spiritual realm, like can really verify it the same way we can verify the existence of a canyon or a mountain or some other scientific thing that we, gravity, for God's sake, So what does that world look like? What would it do to the human experience? Would it rob it of what makes it vital and interesting and beautiful? Or would it add to it? Would we go to war with the ghosts? I mean, there's so many places we could go with this, but I just wonder if ruining that mystery, or I should just say eliminating that mystery, does that make the human experience less meaningful, or does it increase it? I mean, where do you lean on this? Do you need more time to think about it? Because I'm still thinking about it, to be honest.
It's kind of like if you had $1 billion tomorrow, you think that'd be great, but would it actually make you not want to do anything, right? Would it make you feel like life was pointless because sort of like you need the struggle? Or in the Matrix, like the first Matrix was a perfect world and it just didn't work because we need struggle.
Yes,
Right.
yes, right. We need
It's
the
like,
mystery. We need, if we know too much, it's sort of like like Greek myths and even biblical stories, the tree of knowledge, for crying out loud,
right.
going all the way back. If we know too much, if we know everything, people have been grappling with this via metaphor, obviously, well before now. So do we want to know for real?
No, look, I think what you say is very true. I was talking to James Renner once, and he said something along the lines of that he felt like I always heard a ticking clock. And when he said that, I was like, that is so true. And it sort of goes to what you're saying, like this notion of you only have so much time, and you just want to do as much as you can. You don't want to waste any of it, and you want to
Yes.
make whatever mark you can while you've got the chance to do it. But like you said, if all of a sudden the clock isn't ticking anymore and you have unlimited time and there's just no limit to the sand in the hourglass, as it were, then yeah, maybe it would change. I mean, it certainly would change the human experience if suddenly you knew for sure that this is what was going to happen. Would it
Yeah.
be for better or worse? I don't know. You talk about an existential question. I don't know that we could actually go to the war with the ghosts. We'd probably try. We'd try and go to war with everybody else.
Well, what can we mine from them? And then once we figure that out, once we figure out what the ghosts can do for us on an economic and other level, then yeah, we go to war with them. But I feel like, though, if we develop as a society to the point where we could confirm for sure the existence of a spiritual realm, that maybe we would be beyond that desire to go to war. Who knows? That's my optimistic side at work, but I do think that it is one reason why I tend to find that, outside of course the true crime element of mystery, that the larger mysteries, the what came before the Big Bang, what explains this, what explains that, these big questions, why I'm generally comfortable with the mystery, because it's like I don't necessarily need that spoiler. I think the mystery is interesting in and of itself, and we should value that and what it means. And too many people want, to drill down to the answer, get the truth, but I don't know. I think there's a reason we don't know yet. and we should savor that, because too much knowledge can sometimes not be in our best interests as a whole. So I don't know. That's just my off the cuff thought on this. But I thought about that this morning when I was putting these questions together. I'm like, what would that do to us? What would it do to us as a species? Sort of like knowing that there's life on other planets. If aliens actually presented themselves straight up and we're like, yo, we're here, guys, what does that do to us? Because so much of what drives us is sort of this weird like certainty that we are alone out here floating out in space. And that they can't get to us. Even if they're out there, we can only like theorize. But if they do present themselves, then that just throws so many things existentially into like a giant spinning blade. All right, we got to reshape everything we ever thought we knew or understood about where we are in this universe and what it all means.
There was one of the more extreme sort of this community, sort of the paranormal research community. Really, there's a lot of people who look at it a lot of different ways. And I wish I could remember the name of this book, but there was one sort of part of this community that followed this book that had been written by this lady who said that she had experiences and she knew what the afterlife was like. And essentially, she described it as sort of a civilization and a universe unto itself. And that the people, when you die, you became a part of this and you were aware of us. It's almost like a multiverse type thing. You were aware of us, and that sort of their scientists and engineers were constantly working on how to communicate with us. Which is sort of an interesting way to think about it. But that was her whole thing.
Well, let's hope they're not, as prone. I just think of like, we're going to go to another civilization, and is it like this one, or is it better or worse? Or, it's just, I guess I file in everything that I've learned or experienced or gleaned from being among humanity for nearly 43 years, and just wondering if that's what I would want, or if I could just again be reincarnated. Can I just be a cat? I just want to curl up in a sunbeam and sleep all day. That's what I want to do now as a human being. But
right.
Okay, I am going to wrap this up now. We've been talking for a long time. We go long here, but I got to drill down to the basic molecular level here about ghosts and ask you, Brett, what are some of your favorite ghost movies?
My favorite ghost movie. Well, I've already said Ghost. Patrick Swayze.
Oh, I mean, yeah, duh.
Amazing. And Sixth Sense. So there's those.
Well, great.
The last time we talked, I mentioned one of my favorites, which is a rare one that most people haven't seen, but is awesome. And that's Grave Dancers. Yeah. If you haven't seen Grave Dancers, it is just a rare movie. It is a independent film that is fantastic. And it's such an awesome take on sort of ghosts, and just a great movie. So if you can find that one's a great one. The Haunting of Hill House, not a movie, series. You haven't seen it,
good.
Have to see it. It's amazing. Yes. And then if I can, what is a favorite movie about ghosts? Man, that's hard.
I know I'm putting you on the spot. Probably like worse than any other question I asked you.
I know about ghosts. I think this is kind of about a lot we've been talking about. Session 9. If you haven't seen Session 9, because what's really interesting about that movie is, we talked about what are ghosts? Are they spirits? Are they something left behind? Are they psychic emanations? Well, Session 9 never really answers that question, but it's pretty clear that the place itself is haunted in some form or fashion, and that haunting is having an effect on the living. Yes. And it is a fascinating movie and not a ghost story in the typical way, and is scary. It is a movie that if you watch it alone at night will scare you. It
will, absolutely. And the beauty of that is it marries the sort of paranormal with human psychology in a way that I feel few things do. I mean, in the course of that film, they discover the tapes of a therapy session from somebody who has dissociative identity disorder, and you get to hear this person change from one personality to the next. And I will tell you, I've seen this movie a dozen times. Every single time Mary becomes Simon, I get terrified.
I just had chills when you mentioned
it. Yes. And It's so true. And that movie was recommended to me by, well, again, the person who was on the Cults Primer episode, my friend Bart, who recommended this movie to me in our psychology class many, many years ago, because he's worked with people with dissociative identity disorder and has watched the personality change happen. And, he said, if you ever really want a truly authentic experience of what it's like, what it feels like to watch that change take place, watch this movie. And so I watched it, and it got into my head in kind of a terrifying way. But were they affected by what they listened to? And then how much of it was the ghost? How much of it was their own brain? The movie doesn't answer that question. And that's the beautiful thing about it. And it also, of course, ties into the place and everything that happens there. And the fact that it's filmed on location at Danvers.
Right.
State
We
Hospital.
can now live in a condo.
Gentrification, isn't it great? Great choices. I've had more time to think about this because this is, I wrote this question earlier this morning, but all-time favorite is The Shining, just because of the atmosphere. I think Kubrick just captured the psychological feel of a place with the music and the look of the place and everything. It's just a perfect marriage. And I say this as a Stephen King fan, and knowing that he hates this movie, I don't agree with him. Sorry, Steve. Kubrick got it right. It is one of the best horror films of all time, but also one of the best ghost story movies of all time.
The documentary about it is fantastic as well.
I want to do a whole episode on this movie and that documentary, because there are a lot of interesting nuggets in that documentary that I wouldn't put past Kubrick to have thought about or put in as he was making this movie, because he was a bit of a twisted genius, to say the least. He was an eccentric fellow. Another movie that I want to bring up is The Orphanage, is a huge favorite, which is a Spanish film from, I believe, 2006 or 7. And it definitely pays homage to Guillermo del Toro's Devil's Backbone, which is another fantastic ghost story. One of the saddest as well. It involves, a dead child.
Really,
I mean, it's a sad movie, but so great with the atmosphere and what it shows you. And it's truly terrifying. And another one, this is a deep cut, but I love it because I'm a huge Lucio Fulci. I'm a huge Fulci fan. Love Fulci. Like zombie. Like if you want anything zombies, you just watch a Fulci film. But he made a trilogy called the Gates of Hell trilogy. And there's a film called The Beyond. It's actually the middle movie in it. And honestly, it's the only one that I've seen in this trilogy. I don't need to see the other movies. It is a perfect combination of ghosts and demonic possession. It takes place in a haunted hotel that has a gateway to hell in the basement. And there's tons of gore and tons of over the top like makeup. It's a Fulci movie. I mean, and you've seen a Fulci movie, you know what I'm talking about. See this movie. It's really, really good. It's like his best non-zombie movie, but there are zombie elements in it as well. It is just a great throw it on at like 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. It's freaking great. Here's one I'm gonna just throw out here. This is my coming out of left field, quite literally, Field of Dreams.
I was about to say, you're gonna say Field of Dreams.
But here's why. It's a great sentimental story.
Can't watch that movie without crying. I cry every time. I tell myself I'm not going to cry this time.
It's in the guts. If you love baseball, if you love father-son stories, if you love, it's a great movie. I love it on its face. But you know why I really, really love it is because it appeals to my dual nature as both a sap and a sadist. And so I firmly believe that this movie could be a horror film if you just slightly recut it. And I've seen people do trailers of this movie to make it look like a horror film, but it has all the elements already there. You could keep the casting there. You could keep all the existing footage. Maybe there's some extra footage out there somewhere. Change the music and make it into a horror movie without any extra shooting, because at its core, the story is terrifying. This guy's hearing voices telling him to build something, and they will come. That's scary. That is terrifying. And then
ease its pain.
how is that not scary as hell? And then you add in the ghosts of baseball players in a cornfield. Tell me a movie where a cornfield doesn't make a movie scary. Just
Right.
automatically. You got Signs, you got Children of the Corn, you got
Baseball of the Corn.
I'm just saying this movie just needs a slight rework. I want the people that did the unremastering of the Star Wars trilogy. That's a whole thing. Like they took the remastered versions and then unremastered them and made them as they should have always looked all along. And you could watch these online. They're available completely free. This is like a huge community that came together to remake the Star Wars trilogy to look like, they just basically undid everything George Lucas did. It's amazing. I fully recommend it. I want somebody to do that to Field of Dreams. Give me the Field of Nightmares. Give me it.
Field of Nightmares. There you go. I love it.
Yeah. So, all right. That's all I got. Brett. I mean, we've talked for like 2.5 hours. I don't even know how long we've talked.
Yeah.
Talked all night about ghosts.
Like most things, I could talk about this forever, but I mean, this has been a lot of fun. And look, if you're out there and you're interested in this stuff, the thing is, there is probably a paranormal research group in your town right now that on the weekends or whenever are going out to places and doing this stuff. So you can do it if you want to do it. And I promise you, you will be tired, but you have a lot of fun. The barrier to entry is very low. Like I said, you don't need a lot, and you can even do it in your own home if you're dumb enough to do that. So go out and have some fun.
I still want to investigate my own house. Everybody listening to you saying, don't do that.
You got to live with whatever you find is the problem.
It's a seller's market.
Yeah, well, that's true.
All right. I want to thank, first of all, to everybody who sent me their ghost stories. And there were so many more that didn't make it on, and they understand. I mean, there are so many. I put out this call. A lot of people answered. It is fantastic. And, maybe there will be a future episode of more ghost stories. There are there's plenty of ground we haven't even covered here, but I feel like we covered as much as we could in the span of time that would make for a non 4-hour long podcast. Thank you so much, Brett, for agreeing to come on here and talk about ghosts with me.
Well, it's been an absolute honor, and I can't wait to do it again.
And of course, go everybody and listen to The Prosecutors if you haven't already. Truly one of the best true crime podcasts out there. And I think as of this recording, I am on an episode. So if you want to learn about a narco-Satanist cult that did human sacrifices, you can go and listen to us talk about that on Brett's show. And again, still no Alice. Like one day, I will rope Alice into an episode on this show.
Probably shouldn't do ghosts if you're going to do that.
Oh, probably not. That's a good point. All right. So if you have any questions, any concerns, any additional ghost lore you want to send my way, reach out to me at dddarknesstime@gmail.com. You can also reach out to me on Twitter at dddarknesstime. I'm also on Instagram under the same handle. You could also head on over to iTunes and drop a review. Let me know what you think. And I think that's all I got. So everybody go forth and ghost hunt. Just go make some friends. Go outside. For God's sake, people, get out of your house and go look for some ghosts. And let me know what you find. Bye-bye, everybody. Ding Dong Darkness Time has been brought to you and produced by yours truly, Allison Dixon. It was made possible by an array of amazing co-hosts, friends, family, but especially you, the listeners. Big shouts also go out to the brilliant Nathaniel Dixon for the show art and future legend Spencer Morlock for all the music. I'll be back again soon with another episode. In the meantime, be good, you little ding-dongs.